please stand up and join me in welcoming Cheetie to the stage. So, you've been doing a lot. You just came back from speaking at Congress. You got the restaurant going on. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm great. I'm excited to be here. It's Friday night. I'm not working the line, so it's kind of dreamy.
Does it feel a little weird?
No pun intended. Yeah, it's a little weird. I mean, there's always a little pang of guilt when I'm not there for service, but that's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's good for the team.
It's good for the team. They will survive without you.
They'll have to figure it out, and I think that's the best thing. Every time I leave and come back, they seem stronger, so that's good.
That's good.
Yeah.
So you got to leave more often.
There's a balance. Yeah.
So we want to talk to you tonight about your journey as an entrepreneur, as a restaurant owner, as a chef. I want to start a little bit about your origin story, right? And so I know that your family immigrated here from India, and then when you were like 6 months old, y'all went back to India.
Yeah.
Like, what was going on?
My mom, she had a very tragic childhood, and her parents were killed when she was young, and she had a lot of survivor guilt, and I don't think anybody ever really dealt with it, and nobody in the country even talked about the partition and all the people that died in that whole migration that was forced. So I think being in America was like an amazing thing for her, but she was really conflicted about losing touch with her culture and raising daughters or raising children in America and leaving her siblings behind. And she had this like imagination that they were maybe starving, or they, here they are pursuing, wealth, really like pursuing a comfortable life. And I think she just really felt guilty about it. So they had a 5-year visa, and they were supposed to extend it. And she was like, no, let's go back. My dad's like, oh, okay.
Yeah,
and so he didn't, they didn't extend it. And then she got pregnant with me, and she was like, no, I think I want to stay. And it was like too late.
It's too late.
Yeah.
And so when they went back, when y'all went back, was it the intent that you were going to stay, or was the intent was like, we're going to go back for a little bit and then we're going to come back to the U.S.?
I think they weren't very deliberate about it. I think my mom had imagined that they were going to go back, and then reality hit when they went back, and it was just like, what are we doing here? We had a path and we were on a good track, and now here we are dealing with all of the things that we left on purpose. So I don't remember a time when I was little in India that we weren't dreaming of coming back to America.
Yeah.
That was a very common conversation. Common. Yeah.
So you and your family did return, and you returned when you were 9 years old, right?
8.5, yeah.
8.5, 9. And you ended up going into New York, right?
Mm-hmm. The Bronx.
So the Bronx.
Yeah.
What was the biggest culture shock going from India to the Bronx?
There was so much, just life was so different. I played outside every day, all day. As a kid. We didn't have a television. We didn't have a telephone. No, I mean, infrastructure there is very different. Like the electricity would go out for, a few planned blackouts every afternoon. My grandmother lived with us. Mm-hmm. I took a rickshaw to school. It was completely different.
Yeah.
And it's not like we lived in a village. We lived in a very modern city, like the most modern city in India. Small city. But when we moved to New York, we had this picture of America as this like shiny, clean, wall-to-wall carpeting and lots of space, and like
I saw those commercials.
Yeah, and we landed in the Bronx, and we live in a 2-bedroom apartment. There's 3 kids and my parents, and it's not safe, and we're just kind of like inside all the time, and there were a lot of kids from other parts of the world, but there weren't any kids from India.
Yeah, so it was kind of hard to find.
I just felt like a freak, So I don't know. I was like had an accent, and I had really stupid clothes, and we didn't have any money, and my mom was losing her mind, and it's just, I think any kid that has that experience of moving, even moving from like place to place,
Right.
goes through a thing, and kids adapt really well, or you think you do, and you don't really understand the things that you've done.
That you're changing as you're trying to adjust to this environment.
Yeah, that's what therapy's for after you move out. Right.
It's a lot of money that's been spent on therapy. So you move, you're trying to figure things out as a kid. Your parents are trying to figure things out, right? And that's the stuff we never realize because, we're kids. We don't realize our parents are trying to figure stuff out too. But considering your first generation, did they have any expectations for you being in the States? Like what they were like, Cheetie, you need to do this.
Well, it was never really even discussed because it was assumed that I'd be the best student in the class, that I would, my sister was like, she came out of the womb and she knew she wanted to be a doctor, right? I have never known what I wanted to do with my life. I still kind of don't. And so my mom would always say, and my mom was raised in northern India, and like girls get an education to get a better husband. They don't choose their husband, and she did. They don't have a career for the sake of having a career. They pursue degrees and then they don't use them, So she wanted to make sure that and my dad too, that we, I could do anything I wanted. So she was like, you don't have to be a doctor. You can be a lawyer. I think she meant you can be a lawyer or an engineer. Those are the, just don't, they were both PhDs. They were research scientists. And that's a really hard life. You don't, you only make money if you get grants. So you have to write a grant every year, every 5 years. Constantly there's this oh my God, if we don't get the grant, we're going to lose our job. Yeah, exactly. So she was like, maybe don't do that. But I would get, I was going to have a professional degree.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I grew up, I think a lot of Indian kids can probably relate. If you get a 98, it wouldn't be awesome. You'd be like, what happened? Oh somebody get 100? Was it possible to do? Because if it was, then you should have done it. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, it was a very academic household, and, it was very food driven too, but food was not a career, and arts were not a career option. So I just I'm a middle kid. So I kind of, slithered under the radar, tried to be as helpful as I could. Maybe they didn't notice that I wasn't planning on I didn't know what I wanted to do. So,
I mean, like a lot of us, right? We're just kind of there's some folks like you mentioned, your sister, she knew.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of like you. I went through a long period of just I have no idea.
Yeah.
What I want to do from a career or just life standpoint, just kind of went with whatever was happening. But I know food was, while it wasn't thought of from your perspective as a career, it was a passion, right?
Yeah.
And how did food start to show up in your life, and how were you engaging with it?
I mean, I think that relationship has changed so many times throughout my life. And really, since I was a little kid, like I mentioned, my grandmother lived with us, and she wasn't an awesome cook, but she cooked every night. And I loved being in the kitchen with her. I just, I don't know if it was that I loved being with her, or that I loved being in the kitchen, or I loved being in the kitchen with her. She let me do stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes that was a bad thing. She'd let me make flatbread on the pan, and I burned myself, your
mom must have been.
But she just wanted to please me, and I wanted to please her. And it was this very,
bond.
Yeah, it was a very sweet bond, and it was all really around milk and bread and spices, and even washing the dishes. I just couldn't wait to be a big girl and do that. And then when we moved to America and my mom was working, then it was I was her helper, so I would get dinner started, and it became a chore. But then I also there was a separation between what we were eating for dinner at home, and then I would read cookbooks. We would go to the library sale and get a box of books for $2, and I would always get the cookbooks. And so there was oh, well, my mom doesn't use cookbooks. We just cook, but then there's this whole other way of doing stuff.
That's happening.
Yeah, so it's kind of a fun study for me. And then it became a vehicle for procrastination. When I was in school, I would, go to the dorm kitchen in the basement and make a bunch of food and get people to eat. And then, I was just always kind of driven by it. And now I have a very different relationship with it. Yeah.
Business oriented, but probably still, passion filled too, right?
It's a lot more, it's different. It's regimented. I have to it's very rare that I get to just cook without recording the recipe. Like I have to be thinking about.
You have to be constantly thinking about how you can scale it across and share it with the rest of your chefs.
How to translate it. How to transcribe it. How to cost it out, and like what's practical. There's all these parameters, which is sometimes a good vehicle for creativity. But
I get it. Yeah. But one thing I wanted to touch on too was that Dreamville Festival, tomorrow and Sunday is music, and I know that you went from New York to North Carolina, and music was also it's probably still a huge passion of yours. Like, tell us about that. Like, were you, obviously probably pursuing a music career, or was it just, a passion and you were interested in it and you were just going along with it?
Well, so part of like assimilation in New York, when I was, 11, I was always really into music, but in India it was like, the Beatles and ABBA and Bollywood records and, movies or whatnot. And when we moved to New York, there was all of this like awesome, these punk bands were happening, and like the radio was amazing, and like, people were doing cool stuff, and it was just like obsessive. And it was also a good way for me to be friends with people, especially like guys, and not in like a flirty way. I just like,
like a commonality.
Oh, I love the Who and I love Led Zeppelin too. It was kind of a good language. So it, I was kind of always into it. And I went from New York to UMass actually.
Oh, okay.
So, and when I was in college, I worked at the radio station, and, so I started thinking, well, maybe this will be somewhat a legitimate career, and I could be a manager for a band. I don't want to work for a record company, but maybe I could. And so like I made friends with people that come on tour, and there were a bunch of like really nice people in Raleigh, and I was like, I'm going to go visit. And then I'm just going to live here for a year and see what happens. And so
then you stayed.
Yeah, I stayed and stayed and stayed.
So how do you make the transition from managing artists and, having this career in music to being like, you know what? I'm going to open my own restaurant.
Yeah. Man.
Like that's such a like, it's creative, but it's still two very different things.
It was very different. So I'm 22. I start my own company. I'm managing bands. I get them all like big fat record deals, and then they all break up.
It's the thing about bands.
Yeah, it's like not mine. It wasn't my decision. That they're the creative force. So that kind of fell apart, and I was like, I actually hate managing people. And so I opened a restaurant, real smart. And I just, was like still young, and I met my now husband, and he was like, and I just wanted to play music, and, again, like punk rock and DIY. And it's just like, you don't have to be, great. Just express yourself. Yeah. So I was like, well, fuck it. I'll do this for a little while. And so we did. And I just, wanted to get out. And I was sick of being like Raleigh's small town.
You're on the road. Like, it's just,
so
it's repetitive.
It is. And I thought being on tour would be a great way for me to learn how to play, because I wouldn't be playing in front of my friends. It's easier to play in front of strangers. If I mess up, I'll never see them again. It doesn't matter. So that's sort of what we did. We just went to the state auction lot and bought a prison van and, cobbled some money together and made a band and went on tour. And then I just fell in love with it,
Well, gas probably wasn't what it is today.
Well, it went up and down. It seemed like every time we went on tour, gas would go up. It's just one of those things. But in the meantime, my husband and two friends opened a music venue on McDowell Street next to where Pools is. Now there's nothing there. But it was just like a cinder block building. It used to be a tire factory, and they opened a very basic music venue. and a lot of great bands came through, and I didn't want to have any part of it. And so this is, Raleigh's like really small, and there's nothing happening downtown, and rent's super cheap, and nobody's doing anything downtown.
Sounds like opportunity.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And so that they did that for like 5 or 6 years. We were on tour all the time, and I would come back and I'd just be like really wanting to cook. And I was working in a restaurant to support being in a band.
So you had.
So like music and beverage and food kind of all became, they lived in my life in a very uncomfortable way because they're all kind of separated.
Yeah.
But when the building got torn down that King's was in, we started looking for a space that had restaurant as a part of the concept.
Yeah.
But I just wanted a tiny little eatery.
Small,
Eatery, not a restaurant.
Eatery.
I wanted a food truck that didn't move. Like I just wanted that thing with like 4 items and
super simple.
Yeah. And use seasonal things and go to the farmer's market and find stuff to cook. And like, that's what I wanted. And we really looked for a small space, and we didn't find anything. And this space that we're in now was already a restaurant and a music venue and a bar, and except it was almost 11,000 square feet. So we got the lease on that building, and it was like, okay, I guess I'm opening a restaurant.
I think you're opening a restaurant.
Yep.
It's interesting when you said you found a space that you said it was previously a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
How important is that versus like a completely why not go with a completely new space?
It's really expensive.
Okay.
And we didn't have any money. So that's like a big part of, being an entrepreneur, opening a restaurant. Like we couldn't have done what we did if Raleigh, like now.
Yeah.
Raleigh's not affordable to take a chance by, for nitwits who don't know what they're doing and like open 3 businesses in one. It's still like now, we understand what it takes, and like, you grow because you have to.
Right.
But it's, it's so expensive. Plumbing, construction, electrical, and then a space that size needs sprinklers, and then you need a fire alarm, and like, you need hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now that build out would be millions of dollars, and like that's just never going to be
feasible. You're not going to make that money back.
No, and also like I didn't know how to go to a bank and get a loan and write I didn't have that language at all. So, I had saved money from being a manager. We got a down payment on our house. We bought our house early. So we were, refied. And
Wow.
So we did a lot of the work in the restaurant. Like, yes, it was built out, but it was ugly. So we renovated, and a lot of it was like with our own hands and our friends who were really talented, carpenters and like fix-it-alls, and like we know how to do auctions really well. So,
it takes, it takes a village. Just like they say it takes a village to raise a kid. It's very much the same for businesses, right? Like you can't pay for everything. It doesn't make financial sense to pay market for all of these things. You got to figure out how to call in favors or trade things where you can. Now, one thing I didn't hear you say was that you didn't say you went to culinary school. So how did you learn the techniques, to cook?
Terror is sometimes a really great teacher. I studied a lot, like on tour, you'd have like 6 hours a day, and I don't like to talk very much. And my bandmates are all dudes, and they're just like blah, 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 blah. And I'm in the loft, like reading cookbooks and studying and like watching videos. And then, I remember right before I was like getting ready to open, I was like, I don't know how to break down a fish. So I went and got like a bunch of cheap fish and just learned how to break down. Just, you teach yourself, and you get better at your knife skills. You understand the things that, matter, and your techniques really matter. And I taught myself to play guitar. I can teach myself how to, brunoise and fillet. And I still study all the time. So, there was a long time when I really wished that I'd gone to culinary school, but all of my friends who were like, you just have such a, natural and, inventive way of looking at things because you didn't get beat down by by culinary instructors.
These techniques that
clearly
you're doing fine.
I mean, if you want to learn it, you'll find it. If you value it, you'll learn it. You just need discipline.
Yeah,
and that's school just teaches you how to learn. Really.
How you learn.
So
yeah.
Tell
me, so you've been operating this business for quite some time now, Garland, and tell us about like everything from, consistency in the dishes to, to managing staff to budgeting. Like what was what has been, still the biggest learning curve to this?
Managing people. I think that's still, it's the hardest. It can be the most rewarding and also like the most painful. Like I remember the first time somebody gave me their notice, I was just like, but you've only been here for 3 months. Like you can't leave. You can't move to Philadelphia. What are you thinking? Like, how could you do this to me? Managing expectations and like, making it so people can succeed. Like, and it was really hard because I was working so much, you work 80 or 90 hours a week and you're just like beat down and you're terrified and nobody was coming to the restaurant. And like, we were losing money every 2 weeks. We were like going into our line of credit and then climbing out of it and then going right back in. It's just like, man, what did I do?
Like, what did I get myself into?
Yeah. Like I can't back out now because we're like on the hook for it. So, managing people is definitely the hard, and I still struggle with it, but you learn from other people and like you learn to have conversations, initially out of desperation, but then you realize that like everybody's kind of had this learning curve and there's an actual like skill set and there are things that you can learn how to be a better manager and how to be a better leader and a mentor and like the things that you implement into your business matter and like the math of it is all connected to it. Same with consistency with recipes. Like you can't be the only person who knows how to cook something. You can't do everything. No, you can't. And you got to come up with ways of like writing a recipe that people can understand and do it over and over again. If it means like you got to divide it up into sections, then that's actually the smartest way to do it.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
Tell me about this last 2 years are, you can plan as much as you can for the worst as a business.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine you were thinking a global pandemic. I know what to do here.
Yeah.
Like, how has that been as a restaurant owner?
Well, it's, it's life-changing, I think, for everybody. But I remember when it first happened, I was like, oh my God, we're going to get like 2 weeks off. Yeah. Like we have enough money to pay our staff for 2 weeks and not worry about it. And, we got this. And then, in the beginning of the pandemic, every day was like massive change and like, the numbers and the numbers. And then somebody told me, is like, I think it's going to be like 6 weeks. And I was like, oh man, I don't know. So after like a day, we realized that there's no time off in this. Like we closed, we realized who we could keep on our team and who needed to be paid and couldn't actually legally go on unemployment.
Wow.
So, we committed to paying them. And then we kind of, when I knew that there was going to be federal assistance, we furloughed everyone. And then we started working on how do we operate safely? How do we get grants? How do we, what are these different programs that are happening of feeding school children? And how do we do meal kits? And like, is takeout safe? Like how many people, all of that stuff. So there was like, it kept going and we just really thought, okay, if we can get through the next 6 weeks, okay, if we can get through the next 8 weeks, all right, if we can get that, then it became like, if we can get through a week,
we'll be.
And then it just kind of kept going. And like, I think, restaurant people are used to having fires every day that you're putting out. And it just became one of those things where you kind of have to center yourself and like the anxiety after a while, there's only, you can't drink every day and you can't not sleep. And so the answers always come back to like, taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
So you can take care of other people.
People.
So you can take care of your business, and you just do what the situation calls for. And once people started talking about vaccine, it was like, all right, this is over now. And then we learned, like, I think actually last year was harder than 2020.
Wow.
Yeah, just because like the shock of it, going from everybody getting vaccinated and reopening the dining room to like, oh, there's a variant, and then there's another variant, and the team that we had sort of kept, and then we got some of our old folks back. And then once we went through that change, they were like, I can't.
They were like, I'm done with it.
They were gone.
So then staffing becomes a challenge.
Staffing was like a gut punch. It was like an existential crisis.
Wow.
Yeah, it was hard.
So it's, that was 2 years ago almost, when that 2 week, you thought
Yeah, it's been more than 2 weeks. March 16th is when we shut down. Yeah.
Right. And now, we went to the restaurant the other night, and things, feel semi-normal, right? Like folks are coming back through. I have to mention that, you've been nominated for a James Beard Award, and all of these things seem to be happening. How do you think about it today? Like, what do you think about, the restaurant today? Do you feel a bit more at ease, or like you still have those anxieties?
I have a lot of anxiety, but I don't have as much as, or it's different than it was in November. I've just gotten maybe better at living not with it, but like putting it next to me.
Yeah.
Like it's always going to be there, and learning the lessons of just because you're thinking something doesn't mean it's the reality.
Right.
And so finding a center beyond that, and just like we can plan, but just know that it's in pencil. There's no ink. And you just get through the week, and you do your best, and you really, like I want the team, like it's always about the staff, like no matter what, it's just about the staff. And like, even if we went away, or even if like things get worse, like much worse again, and they move on from this career, or they move to a different restaurant, it doesn't matter. Like it's really not fundamentally, nothing has really changed, because life is so temporary anyway. So just living in the moment is like a discipline that I'm really kind of actively working on.
That's a good practice. That's something I need to practice myself.
It's the hardest thing.
It's very hard, because you're in this phase where you're like, yes, I need to do that, but I also need to be thinking about what's ahead of us.
Yeah.
So it's that duality that it's a challenge.
Yeah. How do you plan for growth when you're not sure if growth is possible?
It's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me, so I know a couple of days ago, you went to Congress, right, to talk about issues facing independent restaurants around the country. What's going on? Why did you go? What's happening?
Well, this particular testimony was the Small Business Committee in the Senate, and I had done one virtually for the House last year. And this all started because of the Independent Restaurant Coalition, and that was formed like literally 4 days after the pandemic, after lockdown started nationally. And, restaurants were the first. We're always on the front line. Something is happening, look to your independent restaurants, and you'll get a vibe for what's going on.
What's going on, right.
And so restaurants were like freaking out. Remember when we thought that we could get COVID from a paper bag?
Oh, yeah.
And like from takeout containers, and like bleaching everything, and like washing your grocery bags before you brought them in the house. Like, we didn't know anything.
We didn't know.
And so restaurant owners independent restaurant owners generally are working really hard all the time. And we operate in a bubble. Like, we get there in the morning, we manage the morning staff, we stay through service, we manage the evening staff. We're like, doing 100 things. We're plumbers and accountants and doing all of it. We don't think of ourselves as a collective industry. And when the pandemic started, we're like, oh my God, we're not we're like all in this together, and there's nobody advocating for this part of the industry. Chili's and Outback and McDonald's,
They're good.
They all have a seat at the table in DC, and they are the ones who are influencing the laws, and they're the ones who are keeping the minimum wage what it is and the sub minimum wage what it is. But nobody's talking about the innovative ways that we, source from local farmers, and we pay our staff more than than we're like legally obligated to. We find creative ways of making people come together, and we anchor our communities, but we're not represented in the government. And we need help. Like if we go away, like we're 4% of the GDP, 4% of the GDP, and nobody knows that. And there's 350,000 restaurants applied for a grant that took a year to become a reality, which is a really long time in a pandemic. But also, that's a really that's massive. That's a massive success to get a coalition together to write a grant program, to get it submitted in the Small Business Administration, to get it administered, to have Congress pass it. It's, amazing work, right? Well, it was supposed to be, we asked for $120 billion. Oh, wow. And we got funded for $28 billion. And we were kind of given a promise that this was going to be a down payment.
Yeah.
And so we're like, okay, well, as long as the infrastructure is there, refilling it shouldn't be a problem.
Right. It's already, technically it should be there.
Yeah. But so 300,000 restaurants applied within the first month. I mean, most of them in the first two or 3 days. And only, only a third of the restaurants got funded. And these are not, everybody's like, oh, restaurants made, $10 million grants. No, the average grant was $500,000. And just a real synopsis was it's your losses. It's recovering your losses. It's you submit and everything is proven, and, you have to submit a lot of documentation, but we're good at doing all this stuff. We know how to, consolidate a PDF and submit it. We got this. So here we are a year later, and still nothing. So, the conversation was theoretically about the supply chain, but, guess who's bearing the brunt of the supply chain issues? Restaurants. So, we were fortunate to get the grant, and I know, there's no question that if it wasn't for that, we would be gone. We would have gone out of business a year ago, 100%. There's no way. It's just impossible. But we can weather these labor shortages and paying $85 a box for fryer oil when we used to pay $35.
What?
Yeah, I've paid up to $100. We use non-GMO oil because we're very health conscious. Yes. But still, it's I can't even get it. And this, so many things are global market, and we source so much locally. So we didn't really have as many issues as somebody who runs maybe a sports bar and they get commodity wings or whatever. Their prices have gone up like crazy. Mm-hmm. I can rewrite my menu and put a different cut of things on there. Nobody's going to think twice about it. But there's a lifeline. And, like you were saying, how do you manage? They're all a series of bridges from one crisis to another, and this is a real bridge. It's not just a rope. So that's really what I was there to advocate for. And then beyond that, once this grant issue is either funded or not going to happen, the food system really needs some advocacy. It's broken, and the labor system is broken. Yep. And, all of those, we need a seat at the table. We need to talk about it. Lawmakers don't know unless you tell them, and you got to make some noise, and you have to make your presence heard.
In their face.
Yeah. That's right.
One more question for you before we take a question from the audience. You've navigated a lot of different circumstances in your career, whether that was, figuring out what you wanted to do, to getting into music, to opening a restaurant. Now, for, someone in our audience that might be interested in doing that, what advice would you have for an aspiring restaurant owner and chef?
Well, if somebody had given me this advice before I did it, I might not have done it. But, I think a bigger question is, I mean, there's restaurants, right? So you should work in a restaurant first.
Yep.
You should get the training that you need. You should try to operate something like you own it. Like try to manage something like you own it, just to see how it feels. Like, but don't get stuck.
Yeah.
But overarching, I think, like what you were saying earlier in this conversation, like the things that you're passionate about.
Right.
Think of them as your career. And I think we were talking backstage about like most people in this country have 3 careers in their life. And nobody really tells you that. So don't think about the decision as though you're, looking ahead, like, is this, I'm going to make this decision for the rest of my life. Like think about the moment and think about where you are and be creative and fuel your creativity. If that's like what inspires you, figure out a way to do it, and then know that life will bring you to the next step, and it'll feel right at that time. So.
I love that. I especially love the statement about the 3 careers, because you're right. No one talks about it.
Yeah, I'm not making my decisions from when I was 20. Like, I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah.